Please be seated. We have just the right speaker for this Shabbat. Jonathan Ornstein is the CEO of the JCC in Krakow, Poland. As you know, Poland before the war had 3 million Jews. 2.7 million of the Jews perished in the Shoah. Only 1/10 of that community survived. And yet, Krakow, the JCC, is a study of resilience and rebirth and vitality. And how he got there is such an interesting story, which I hope he'll go into. He's actually born and raised in New York City. He moved to Israel in 1994 and worked for 7 years on a kibbutz, and then he served in a combat unit of Tzahal before moving to Poland. And so, Jonathan, we're so blessed by your presence this morning.
Shabbat Shalom. Tikva, hope. Our minds are all focused on Israel and the pain and suffering. Israel to me is more than a place or a homeland. Israel is an idea. That idea is best captured in one word, which conveniently is the name of the anthem, Hatikva, the hope. Our Jewish history has not been an easy one. From expulsion to crusades to the Inquisition to pogroms to the Holocaust, we have suffered. During the Holocaust, in living memory, 80 years ago, over 90%, as the rabbi said, of my adopted community in Poland was murdered. And more than half the victims of the Holocaust, over 3 million, were Polish Jews. Most of the survivors left, but little known to the rest of us Jews, some stayed in Poland, and during 45 years of communism behind the Iron Curtain, they had to hide their identities from everyone to avoid anti-Semitism. They even hid their identities from their own children. But somehow, they never lost hope. Now, in the 30 few years since communism ended and Poland is free, hundreds, even thousands of young Poles are discovering that they're Jewish, and they're making the decision to explore their Jewish identity, an identity that was denied to them because of the Holocaust and then 45 years of communist anti-Semitism. Our JCC, founded and opened by King Charles in 2008, which is its own story, not for today, it exists to take care of Holocaust survivors. We have 50 Holocaust survivors that we're caring for, and to reach out to all of those Poles who are finding out about their Jewish roots and do all we can to bring them back into the fold. Those young Poles returning to the fold include a woman named Kasia, who grew up in a Catholic girl in Krakow without knowing she was Jewish. After discovering her Jewish roots in her 20s, she came to a Hanukkah party at the JCC, where she met a dashing, modest Yankee fan. I had to allude to the New York-Boston thing somewhere, so get it out of the way, who works at the JCC. They got along very, very well and decided to get married, and they had the chuppah in the courtyard in front of the JCC. Now they have a daughter named Ayala, who's 20 months old, and is the youngest kid in the JCC preschool, the first Jewish preschool in Krakow since the Holocaust. And of course, that story, if I didn't give it away with the big smile, is my story. If you Google, of course, after services, how many Jews are in Krakow, it says there are 100 Jews in Krakow. Our JCC now has 850 Jewish members. And besides the first preschool in Krakow, first Jewish preschool since the war, we have BBYO, Hillel. We have 100 Jews that come for Shabbat dinner each week, hundreds of people studying Hebrew, dozens of programs a week to serve our growing Jewish community, and the 10,000 visitors a month who visit our JCC. And it was nice to see so many of you as I walked around who reminded me that you visited our center. Historically, Jews came to Krakow only to see death and tragedy. And now they also come to see life blooming an hour's drive away from Auschwitz, from the horror of Auschwitz. But our reborn Jewish community is not only focused on our own well-being. Our community, a community that was almost completely decimated as the world stood silent, refuses to be silent when others are suffering. Within 2 weeks of the beginning of the Ukraine war 20 months ago, our JCC had doubled in size, and we set up a full-scale humanitarian relief operation. Our food pantry, one of a dozen or so programs we're running, has been open every day since the war started. Got ahead of myself, the war ending. That means Shabbat, Christmas, Yom Kippur, actually 2 Yom Kippurs, every single day our food pantry's been open. And we continue to house and feed 700 Ukrainian refugees a day, almost all women and children. And to date, our small center has directly helped over 250,000 Ukrainian refugees, 98% of them non-Jews. And we have, and I apologize for mentioning money on Shabbat, we have raised and spent $10 million, which is 5 times our annual budget, to helping Ukraine. And I'll tell you a quick story that illustrates why we're doing this. When I think about what course of action our community should take in terms of Ukraine, we have an organization, there's an international organization called the Child Survivors of the Holocaust, Hidden Children. Most of the survivors in our community, of the 50, most of them were hidden children. And there's a Krakow branch of this international organization, and they meet the last Saturday of every month in our JCC at 11 a.m. And in March 2022, a few weeks after the war started, we were having our meeting, and the place where the seniors meet, they have a dedicated spot for Holocaust survivors, a room in the building, is in the ground floor, right across the hall from our food pantry, 20 feet away. And as we're sitting there during the meeting, and I always go to the meetings if I'm in town, women and children, older women, some in wheelchairs, some young women pushing strollers, would come into the food pantry a few at a time, take diapers, milk, a sweater, a toothbrush, whatever they needed for free. And one of the survivors during the meeting stood up, and she herself was a little girl in the Warsaw Ghetto, and she was saved when her parents handed her across the ghetto to strangers that raised her. They told her she knew who she was Jewish, but never saw her parents again. She moved from Warsaw to Krakow, and she is in her early 80s, stood up, pointed across the hall at these women coming in, Ukrainian refugee women, and she said, "That was us. These people were us 80 years ago." And she said, "I suggest that we take our annual dues for this organization, which was about $11 a year, and donate them to help Ukraine." And one by one, the Holocaust survivors' hands went up, and each of them agreed to give their annual dues to help the Ukrainian refugees. So a community that knows suffering understands what it means and the responsibility to try to prevent the suffering from others. And what about now, as Israel is under vicious attack, and there are dozens of Israeli families stranded in Krakow, or, tragically, too afraid to bring their children back home to a country at war. And we're serving them too, providing housing, medical care, psychological counseling, and welcoming those Israeli kids. We have about 6 Israeli kids in our preschool. Besides the regular Israeli kids in our preschool, those are 6 from families who are waiting to go back to Israel. These Israelis whose grandparents escaped Krakow to find safety in Israel are now finding temporary refuge in a community that has gone from victim to caregiver in living memory. During the darkness of the Holocaust, when being a Jew in Poland meant almost certain death, who could have hoped that 80 years later, in living memory, the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of those Jews who were marked for death would be living in a free, democratic Poland, a Poland where being Jewish is safe and accepted, and the threat of anti-Semitism is lower than almost anywhere else in Europe and beyond. And that those Jews, having miraculously found their way back into the Jewish world, would be in a position themselves to offer refuge to Jews and non-Jews in danger in their own countries. The rebirth of Jewish life in the community next to Auschwitz is a triumph of the Jewish spirit, a triumph of hope. And as long as we Jews, no matter the circumstances that keep hope alive, then our enemies, whether the Nazis or Hamas, do not stand a chance. Shabbat Shalom, Am Yisrael Chai.